Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen from Bangkok, Thailand, Asian Institute of Technology. We're delighted to welcome you to this webinar series. This is our second webinar on Lean Six Sigma and change management. And my name is Dr. Faiz Shah. I'm responsible for the Yunus Center for Social Business at AIT. And I also run the SDG lab here. So we're delighted to welcome all of you and our special guests for today. Of course, our regular presenter, Mr. Muhammad Ali Toosy, CEO of Toosy Advisory Services, which has a partnership with AIT to lead a series of Lean Six Sigma trainings online. And our guest for today is Mr. Bilal Athar, who is CEO of Wi-Fi Gen, which I understand is one of the new breed of businesses in Pakistan that are transforming retail and business communications. And of course, we also know Mr. Bilal as a Fortune under 30 leader. That's a delightful introduction here for me to meet you for the first time, Bilal. Welcome to AIT and the webinar. I'd like to begin formally with a welcome message from our Executive Director, Dr. Jonathan Shaw.
So good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everybody to this latest webinar, collaboration between AIT Extension and Toosy Advisory Services. This is the second in the series, and we're delighted this time to be able to introduce in addition to our regular presenter, Muhammad Ali Toosy, and the moderator, Dr. Faiz Shah, we have with us Bilal Athar, who will be talking about his experience as an entrepreneur, and specifically the application of lean startup concepts. Bilal is well known as the founder of Wi-Fi Gen, a Wi-Fi-based customer retention and marketing platform for brick and mortar retail industry. We're delighted to have Bilal with us here this afternoon. We're looking forward to a wonderful session and a very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us this afternoon. So thank you very much. Over to you, Faiz.
Thank you, John. We're again, I'm told that we're welcoming people from a number of time zones. So some of you, for some of you, it's broad daylight. For others, it's probably just the sun is going down. Wherever you are, one thing you've always perhaps heard about is how the startup generation has transformed the way we do business. The idea of business and digital connectivity has merged itself into a whole new regime, a whole new paradigm of very transformative business models. And one thing that we've also seen is that in the COVID crisis that we all find the world in at the moment, the pandemic, traditional businesses have really taken a huge beating. And we also see how the storefront or the walk-up business has really stalled because of fear, public health reasons, and even government instructions. But guess what? What has taken the space that the walk-up business has left? It's the digital business. And a number of the businesses that you see functioning today are ones that were not even around a short while ago. They're basically either startups or recent startups, or mutated regular businesses that have now taken the mantle of digital business and created mini startups within organizations. So this is a hugely interesting space for some of us to study, definitely, and for others to work in, of course. But then for the rest of us, it's an enormously interesting space to learn from, to see how the technology bridges that have been created, the ubiquitousness of digital access has created business opportunity. So with that, a lot of people ask me, and this is a question perhaps throw out to both of you gentlemen. A lot of people ask me about startups, and most of them have different ideas about what a startup is. So let's start off by literally taking the term and defining it for everybody, so that for the rest of the afternoon, when we call something a startup, we all understand what we are calling a startup, right? So may I ask Bilal to go first, if that's okay?
There are a lot of when it comes to defining startups, you will find a lot of definitions there, the book definitions. But then there are simpler ones that I would go with. I believe the most simple and the basic one would be solving a problem and creating a scalable business out of it. So this is something what most startups do out of their own garage or maybe college or their own homes. They pick up a problem, they find out something is wrong, they can fix it. Once they start fixing it, they gradually make a scalable business out of it. That's how it goes.
Mr. Toosy, you have a view on what
a wonderful way of actually putting it forward. I would go with I would go, which is very similar with Steve Blank's definition. And he says that a startup is a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model under extreme uncertainty. So yes, Bilal, what you said is totally true. And it is something which has to be scalable, has to be solving a problem, and there should be some uncertainty. The difference is that the term startup is not limited to, in my mind, it's not limited to a company in a garage. If anyone is working in a scalable business, if anyone is solving a problem, and there is extreme uncertainty, automatically, whether it's Boeing, whether it's General Electric, that entity becomes a startup. And that entity needs to operate like a startup instead of operating in a bureaucratic or in a traditional management style.
And I think this is a very important distinction. Of course, the most common distinction between a startup and anything else is something that's recently been initiated, which is what both of you gentlemen have also indicated, that it doesn't have to be a brand new business. It could be one part of a business that's adopted a new model, which is scalable and which is commercializable, either in competition or in supporting an existing model. We also know of startups which have been started by larger established brick and mortar companies who actually, by design, compete with the parent company. And the design is why? Because there are certain younger, savvier customers who are looking for alternatives in the same business segment, but want to buy and utilize services in a different kind of a way. So what I've noticed in some of these competitions that we go to and so on, we see that businesses are designing startups within, or internal startups or entrepreneurial ventures, which actually offer similar or same services, but because the market segment is different, the parent company actually competes, and by that they corner a wider segment of the market. But that's one thing. The second thing that Investopedia actually talks about is that startups are businesses which are new, but which also run on a shoestring. The resource constraints basically are drivers for innovation. The resource constraints are also triggers for certain cutting corner approaches which are actually optimizing the business model. And I think this is where the Six Sigma and the Lean Six Sigma discussion becomes very relevant to a startup. And this is what I think a lot of the people who've signed up today are going to be actually looking for, to see how does a startup actually convert itself from an idea to a scalable business into commercial success, and where does the word shoestring actually figure, and how does that shoestring then become a business or an industry standard, and by that transforms the entire industry practice. These are fascinating discussions. So I'm going to just throw this right back to you gentlemen, and maybe ask one more time, now that we've probably unpacked a little bit of what a startup is. Would you, both of you again, feel free to talk about what you see conceptually as your typical startup model? Because a lot of people who are on this seminar will have heard the term, will have seen examples, will have read about it. So let's consolidate this into one or two ideas or models that then people can use as a point of reference when we talk about startups. So Ali, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I actually think that a startup has to it has to start from an idea. The idea has to be to solve a problem. And that problem has to be big enough. The magnitude of that problem needs to be enough to, when it's solved, it's scalable. And that should not be unrealistically complex. That's my idea.
Right, but
And
we are also looking at, if you had in mind a model, how it walks and talks, and what a startup looks like. Any good examples would be useful. Bilal, would you like to venture that? Because you're yourself a startup, so maybe your model would be a good illustration.
I actually have a model for this. Whenever somebody comes up to me and talk about they have an idea, there are 4 things that I talk to them about. Number 1 is the most basic element. That's the functional need of whatever you're trying to solve or bring in into the world. So that one thing, functional need, what it defines is whatever you're solving, it's actually solving a problem for some people. And then the next one is the emotional need that a lot of people don't really understand. I think emotional need is one of the most important key factors here, because if I'm not solving an emotional problem for you, you may not be able to talk about it to other people that, hey, this is the company that's solving this problem for me. That's how the buzz is created. And that's how startups gain early growth. And the third one is another very important factor that Ali talked about. I call it, does it have $1 billion market? And that's really important, because can you scale that big? If you cannot, if the market is not big enough, then a lot of investors won't be interested in funding you. And that's, if investors don't want to fund you, that's a roadblock right there. And the fourth one, again, is something most people don't really understand. And I keep stressing on it because it's really important. And that is a breakthrough user experience. Now, we all know Apple is the most valuable computer company in the world right now. One of the biggest things behind their success is the simplicity of their products. They're really simple to use. You can buy an iPhone and within 5 minutes, it's working for you. And that same goes for their other products. So simplicity of the product is really, really important. And that's why these 4 key elements, your functional need, emotional need, $1 billion market, and then the breakthrough user experience. If you can combine all 4 of them, you really have a very good startup right there.
And so you've managed to strike that balance in the 4, right?
Well, it took us some time to figure these out, and then eventually, yes.
When we get on to our sort of the trunk of our discussion, of course, we are going to hear a little bit more about your own personal experience as a Forbes under 30 successful entrepreneur, creating a startup that works. But question to Ali, in terms of we talked about solving a big problem. We talked about meeting client emotional needs. We talked about, of course, the $1 billion market and the experience. So any insights, Ali, that would you like to add to this model, or would you like to kind of reconfigure this into something that from your experience has also reflected in,
yes, I think
in how the startup models operate?
I think the core of the startup model is in the process itself, in which it revolves around the user experience. It all revolves around the user experience. That's one of the most important things. You need to have an idea. You need to be able to build upon that idea and make a product. You need to be able to measure that product. And from the data you get, you need to learn. So it's build, measure, learn, and the loop should be fast. It should be there. And the idea is it's all about, we are thinking experience. Like I'll give you an example when I started actually consulting for the Lean Startup, and I started discussing things with people. One of my first people was a product. We were talking about a product. It was a very technically good product, and the technology person had everything in the book inside his product. He had built every complexity possible to make sure that the product is there. But when we started discussing about this experience perspective, and I asked that question in a very layman's term, I said, are you making this product for yourself, or are you making it for someone else?
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the answer was that I'm making for someone else, then the next thing was, then would the person even understand? Will the person even understand what you're trying to sell to them? What is going to be the experience? And after going through all the user experience, after thinking, it took a bit longer than it should have, but it took around a few months. It should have taken less than a month, by the way. And they revamped. It was a payment service. It was a payment service, and they revamped their product. Totally revamped their product. They went to this detail that if you were a female, you would have a different user experience. If you're a male, based on the way they like to actually, back in those days, I'm talking about 5 years ago, so things have moved on. So I'll have to find out what that product is like now. But based on your gender, the way it would move, the way the scroll bar would be, the way you're going to see the graphical user interfaces were different. It was so, they made it so simple. And a very interesting thing is that what we need to do is that we need to understand that success is in simplicity. There is a bank, ING Bank. And recently I actually talked to one of their master black belts too. And yes, I've read about them a lot. And I've actually had a discussion with them, and they said, yes, it's right. Now, just imagine a bank getting consulting from Spotify. Spotify has nothing to do with the bank. Now, because Spotify has a lot of users, and there is a user trend because of Spotify, they have transferred that knowledge of Spotify into their payment service, into the way they bank. And they've done it 5 years ago. They've not done it recently. They've done it, it's been years now. They've matured since then. So just imagine 5 or 10 years ago, someone trying to learn, a bank trying to learn from a company like Spotify. So that is the whole essence. It comes down to the experience. You have to actually understand the type of people, the experience which your users, your potential users are experiencing in other places, and transfer it into whatever you're making. I mean, they transformed from becoming a traditional bank to becoming, and they started considering themselves as a technology company which provides financial services. Now, this is a huge transformation in their mind. And this also comes from the idea of user experience. It also comes from the idea of design experiences. I mean, Bilal earlier actually talked about something emotional bonding. And when I started my company, me and Bilal, we had a discussion on the name. And his advice at that time was, name it what would make you wake up every day and want to do something. So that's where the Toosy came in.
I see.
That's where the Toosy came in.
Well, for me, it's usually coffee that makes me wake up every morning.
Okay.
I doubt I'd be able to name my company coffee. But
that's difficult.
That's a great insight.
That would be interesting, though.
Yeah,
that's a great insight. I think the personal examples really make a lot of the relevance to us.
And similarly,
also,
Dr.
Yeah.
Similarly, there's the concept of disruptive innovation in which the experience is changed. Just a year and a half ago, I showed my father a video which had a device which is put on an iPhone. And that device is going to replace X-rays, ultrasounds.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in the future, maybe even MRIs.
Yeah, there's a lot of actually very interesting tech coming out, which is often reported in, as you know, and the handheld device is actually transforming into much more than we know it for, and I think there'll be even more. But I think before we sort of get sidetracked into all the exciting developments that digital devices are bringing to us and how they're changing lifestyles, I'd also had maybe this is a difficult question, so you're the guys to ask this from. We talked in the model, both your models, you adverted to the experience of the customer, right? And most of the time, experience of the customer is closely tied to the emotional requirements of a client or a customer. So here's the problem, or here's the question. If you look at different contexts of how consumers spend their average day in different parts of the world, there are enormously wide variations. For instance, look at a village in Pakistan and compare it to a large city in Pakistan, or a small community in a relatively far away place and a huge metropolis, with thousands of people. Now, the user experience, would it be the same for everybody using a particular device, such as a handheld phone? Or would it be different? If it will be different because of maybe acceptance of technology issues, user interface issues, literacy and digital literacy issues, whatever they might be, do you think there is a huge difference in how various populations, and I just gave you one example of urban, rural, far, close, does that make a big difference in how the user experience is designed? And if that's the case, what was the magic that smartphones came through? Because the same smartphone is being used by corporate executives. I shouldn't say same because price points are different, but the technology is what I'm talking about. But the average smartphone now packs a lot of modern technology. So even advanced digitally literate users are using the same tech and the same app package. But then at the same time, we see people who are not very savvy with other tech stuff are also using the same phone with similar apps and using their, maximizing their user experience. So this is where this contradiction becomes very obvious. Because on the one side, people are saying, oh, you need to design according to the very specific quality metrics and the social metrics and the experience metrics of a particular customer community. And that's where the consumer or user interface improves, and that's where the user experience, and that's where the billion-dollar market is. But we see that this contradiction every day in our lives around us. So maybe for the next 5 minutes or so, if you would like to just think through or reflect on then what is the magic formula in this seeming contradiction?
Yes.
That's a very good question, Faz. And it's a real problem. So you see, when we talk about different user experience, it's not about a different user experience for everybody. Like there are 7 billion people on this planet. You cannot design a different UX for each billion of them. What really happens is it depends on what kind of the product it is. For example, is it an e-commerce website or an app, or is it a ride-sharing platform, something like that? You design uh, that specific user experience according to whatever the problem you're solving. But when it comes to what the user experience is for people, so you see, humans, we usually interact in the same way. Like if you're living in Bangkok, I'm living in maybe Middle East, Ali is living in, for example, England. We all know the meaning of the camera icon. We all know that this icon means there's maybe camera behind this app. And we all know the icon of the messages. So this language is kind of global now. People do understand emoticons, people do understand certain icons. And that's the reason why we see everybody, maybe somebody's in the village, somebody's in the metropolitan area, that they all understand Android, and they all understand how iOS works, the basic things. And I feel this is the right way of doing it, generalizing things, generalizing the user experience for a massive scale of people. It actually helps you spread the understanding much easier. Why? Because if I'm unable to understand a problem with my phone, someone else would be easily able to help me with that. Or I can just go to YouTube and figure it out, because the same user experience exists for other people. But again, coming back to this point, that this has to be application specific. Like if it's a ride sharing app, yes, there can be a different language. Like in for a village, instead of English, it might be Urdu or might be Punjabi as well. Maybe in Middle East, I should have an option to choose Arabic if I want, right? So in China, Chinese if I want. But that user experience, that I open the app, I see a map and there's a car icon. That shows me if I click it, there's going to be a car around. So that has to be similar everywhere, but the language can change. That's how I look at the user experience.
So this is basically then, Ali, do you think then what you just said about simplicity, you talked about complexity. The example you gave was about somebody who'd done the perfect product according to them, yeah, but it was too complex for the average market. So perhaps the magic word here is simplicity. Yeah. Because people, if they are handling technology, there is a fear of technology. Even I myself, if I have a new app, or if I'm getting into a new user interface and not sure what the buttons or icons represent, I have a fear of pressing the enter key, because I'm not sure what will happen if this doesn't mean what I think it means, kind of. So I think the key message from your conversation here, gentlemen, is simplicity. So yeah, let's have a couple of quick examples from your own experience where simplicity was the clear winner for some of the startups that you've already created yourselves, or as in Ali's case, helped create. So let's take a couple of examples of simplicity and try to illustrate this point about how this actually is the winning formula.
Well, there was a hypothesis which I once suggested. I suggested that people can't understand English. People won't understand in a certain market. You talked about the rural areas, and yes, they won't understand what you the graphical user interface, what you have. So you have to put voice notes in it so that they can actually, because they can hear, even if they can't read, they can still hear. And then in that particular application, they were sent on the GT road. They were told to go to the GT road and start talking to random people. So a team went out They talked to random people, and they found out a unique thing which they did not understand before because they were sitting in a big city. That people don't, in the rural areas, the lesser educated people, they might not know how to type, but they understand how to send voice notes through WhatsApp. So that was a new way of communication. So first they were saying, now if we actually make it like that, our application will become too heavy. But then they understood that if we're making that product for the rural customer, they need to have voice notes to make sure that they understand how to use it. So that, and it's what we need to understand is what are common, what is common and what is different.
Right.
And simplify it as much as possible.
Basically, this is the question that, often we get asked, that how do you know the problem you're trying to solve is the problem that needs solving, kind of. That's the problem, right? Yeah. So Bilal, what do you think? How do you actually know? Ali's given us this great example that you go out with which you think from an urban, educated, literate background, you think it's the simplest interface. Then you go out along a rural road and then you realize that a lot of people are not actually bothered with typing at all, and they're using voice messages. So to me, that's a great sort of example of how, when we think we're solving a problem, are we? So any thoughts on that?
The way I actually go about solving a problem is that you have to initially you have to create a group of small people. We call it the focused group. You create a focused group of diverse people, people from diverse backgrounds. You show them the very first the scratchy kind of a product that you have. It's not even good enough to be called the MVP. You show it to them and you ask, what do you think? And you record the feedback. Now, if you have, for example, 10 people in that focused group, 10 people means 10 different opinions, right? Then you scale. You have 15, 20 people. So max you go about it is usually 50 to 100 people. And depending on what kind of product it is. Based on that feedback, you understand a few things. One of them is how engaged did they actually were. Are they coming back? For example, it's an app that you gave it to them to test it out. You have to see if they are coming back to check that app again or not. If they're not engaging, that means something is lacking in there. You really need to fix something so that they would come back for it. So things like that, you keep maturing based on a certain group of people, and then you slowly and gradually you add more people to it. I see a lot of engineers when I go out delivering talks in universities. I see a lot of great engineers who know their way around app development and web development. They have put a lot of energy, a lot of time into building a startup or a different or a certain application. But they're like, how do I go about launching it? So they actually, what people usually do is they figure out, okay, somebody is solving a certain problem in America. How about I solve the same problem for Pakistan? They would just look at what they're doing, start coding, and then once it's done, they're like, okay, now what? So the first steps first, you don't spend like 3 years coding. You just, the way I tell people is it's usually better to even go pick up something off the shelf. It's like you can go online, buy a script, see if it works, maybe a WordPress script or a plugin, something like that. Just put together something, show it to people. If they understand, if they want to have it, if they like it, start building upon it. So that's one step at a time.
$1 million advice right there, because everything that you need to invent will require enormous inputs, in resources, time, people. And by that time, the market will have moved on. And there's always somebody out there who's got it figured, not perhaps exactly the way you have, but something that you can probably build. So I think the second little message that our startup enthusiasts might pick up from this is get out there and find what's actually out there now, and then
Yes.
tweak it, because that's the shoestring idea, that's the lean startup
Yeah.
idea that I think you're going to talk about in the next 2 minutes or so. Because the whole idea is conserving effort, conserving resources, getting more bang, as they say, for the buck. And so I think this is a classic example of where you think you need to do it all, whereas you can just go out there and you do your market research or market due diligence with an objective of actually picking up stuff that you can tinker with or build on or combine for greater commercial success. So I think that's our second lesson: simplicity and use what you've got, which is basically a good old conservative lifestyle thinking of the 60s, you know, that you don't use it once and throw it away, or don't have single use things. You design things for multiple uses, and you design things for being able to, you know, transmutate into multiple uses and so on. So lovely little thought there. Ali, I think there's another sort of related question to this, and which is about market fit. And most startups that we have seen success, and I'm sure our friends know, who are watching know, that the success rate of startups is nothing to be proud of. You know, they're actually very, very rare successes. And they say that 18 months is the magic timeline where as many as 90% people may either just go completely bust or have to redesign and reintroduce fundamental elements of their product. And I have no reason not to trust this number, because that seems to be the thing, how it is. But they say the 4-year timeline is probably the other big test in the life of a startup. If you've been around for 4 years and you're actually making money, then you're no longer a startup, then you're a regular, thriving business. So with that in kind of that context in our conversation, how do you then create a product fit for market? Because the market transforms on a very fast pace. And the more we see technology coming, it's creating a very interesting phenomenon that technology transforms the market, and then the market completely transforms the product. So the yin and yang cycle of product and market is getting tighter and tighter, faster and faster, and shorter and shorter. So the question is, you're in a startup environment, you've got limited time, you've got very limited resources. What's your formula for creating a best fit product for a heavily dynamic market or market?
Well, first of all, we need to actually understand that there's a concept of a minimum viable product. And a minimum viable product is something which has the minimum features. So you need to have fast iterations, short iterations, fast iterations. And the reason why you need to have fast and short iterations is so that you know how the dynamics of the market is going on. Things can change within minutes, things can change within hours, things can change within days. I mean, you just never know. And with COVID-19, obviously, it was the most unexpected happened. So it has to, what you need to have is you need to have something quick. And the reason why a lot of people fail in 18 months is that they don't adopt fast enough. And
adaptation is something that comes after. But I would like to, kind of ask from your experience about what are the instincts, what are the mechanics, what are the tools, what's the nuts and bolts of picking up a market-ready, best fit product? Is there a magic formula like the ones you've given us? Simplicity and scrounging around for existing solutions are the two magic formulas. Is there a third magic formula where the best fit for market product can be made relatively easily? Adaptability, agility, failing fast, those are good things. But I'm talking about the magic formula for you're in a startup situation. How do you create a best fit? Or can you?
This concept of product market fit, it's really important. And I believe more than 90% of the startups, they fail because they cannot either reach product market fit or they miscalculate it completely. And to figure it out, the first thing you need to do is you need to go back, and when you came up with this idea, that what were the people you were thinking in your mind when you came up with that product, that these are the people we want to build something for. And those are the people, once you have started your focused group, did you figure out that those people didn't actually want it, or they actually wanted it, but they don't just want to pay for it? So things like that. Product market fit is actually very, very complicated process, but you have to simplify it based on what exactly your product is. For example, here's a product idea. You came up with an app where people can actually buy whatever they want from nearby stores just using an app. So all you have to do is download an app, and you can see all the brick and mortar stores around you. You can buy whatever you want from that app. Now, how would I go about the product market fit? I know that people are downloading the app. I know that they are placing orders. That's a good sign. We have a good retention. Very good. What I'll do, I'll give you an example on that. It's a proven example that we actually used. We'll pick up 100 people, 100 of the 100 users, and call each one of them. Or if you cannot call them, just send each one of them an email, a personalized email from the CEO, asking them one very simple question. Number one, how would you feel if this product did not exist anymore? Would you be highly disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or it wouldn't really matter to you? So then you have to figure out all those people who say that we would be highly disappointed, because now that's the power user group. Those are the people you really need to care about. That's your product market fit right there, that this is the group of people, we have to get more of them. So these are some of the formulas how you actually figure out what you're going after.
So this brings me to my sort of, I was mulling this around, and if you take, total chance or serendipity out of this equation, this does make like the power group idea does make a lot of sense. Because you see, until you have a finger on the pulse of the market, and of course the power group is the pulse, because they're going to make transformational decisions for your product.
Exactly.
That's so allow me to say, is that the formula then? The third thing is, don't forget the power group, the power user group, because that's where I think the core market pulses. But then,
because Faz, those are the people who actually care if you exist or not. So that's really, really powerful group that can actually make you successful.
But then, of course, there's this power of total serendipity. You show up, you think it's a great idea, and it actually is. But then there are times you show up and you think it's a great idea, but then it isn't. So that's where the 90% failure rate kicks in. But the magic is, if you took the trouble to get in there and ask that power group, your chances might quite likely improve. Your chances of failure reduce.
And they will reduce.
So not all is serendipity, because you've read a lot about how chance basically ends up playing a major role. And I'm not doubting that, because a lot of the products we see now just showed up and then they stayed. But then, this is, and now it's we have another 15 odd minutes to, actually less, about 14 minutes. But I'd like to ask, and this is for both of you as well, if you imagine $1 billion company, whatever people think $1 billion company might be making, it can be an app or it can be whatever. What do you think then would be the lean startup way to get into that or make that $1 billion company? What are the lean startup principles, rules, or the staircase, if you may, into that $1 billion proposition?
Right.
Or are there
the steps? You mean if you conceive an idea,
let's say we've imagined $1 billion company. What is that $1 billion company? So let's start with describing an imaginary company which you think is a $1 billion company. And then you need to make that $1 billion company come around or exist. So from your own experience, gentlemen, is there a pathway? Is there a roadmap?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. If we talked about this power group, this is something that's really powerful. If you have a group of people, for example, you have 100 people who really care about what you're building, that shows you right there that this product has a potential. And if the market is big enough, for example, the market you're operating in, it's maybe $100 billion market or maybe even more than that, and you figured out early 100 users who would pay anything to actually get an access to whatever you're doing. Now that's a $1 billion company right there, because that's from where you actually start to scale. Those 100 would become 500, and then they would become 5,000, then 50,000. And that's how you're going to get more and more people. And that's one of the examples of how you see the big companies here, like Airbnb, for example. And now Airbnb, as they started, the humble beginnings, they were really different company. They were like, you want to book a couch for maybe a conference. That's what it was like. You're going to a conference, you can book a couch and they were actually airbeds. So you can book a airbed somewhere and join the conference. And then they later on figured out that the people who were using Airbnb, they actually loved it. They had a small group of people who used Airbnb, but they loved it. And then they figured out we can actually scale. We can actually talk to more people who would be willing to participate more, maybe have their rooms set aside for people who would come in and stay a night or two, things like that. So slowly and gradually, now we all know it's a more than $30 billion company today. Why? Because they really cared about those 100, 200 people who used it very early on. And they learned a lot from those people. And that's how they actually scaled one step at a time. And that's how you go about any product, whatever you're doing. First things first, it's really important to talk to who the users are and figure out how exactly are they enjoying the experience, or what you need to do to actually make it better.
Great. Ali, any
There's
any insights on the roadmap?
Something slightly different. I'm going to say something slightly different. I won't name the company, but I would like to say something slightly different over here. I have actually seen an organization who, whether they are $1 billion company or not, that's a different thing. The CEO has a vision. He's gone beyond the startup phase, at least the definition startup phase, first 4 years. He's gone way beyond that. But yes, he's still in the startup mode. Build, measure, word, continuous improvement, continuous innovation. Continuous innovation is still in that mode. So what he started doing was, he started coming up with a vision, and he started vocally saying that in conferences, that we are going to become a $1 billion revenue company. So there's one part about the product and becoming scalable. And once you've become scalable and you are continuously improving, you have to make the people who are along with you, because obviously initially you're just 40, 10, 20, 40, 30, 100. Now they're around 2,000 or so. So every year, the CEO says, this is where we are. We want to become, by 2025, we want to become a $1 billion revenue company. And he actually comes up with the figures. And another interesting part, he actually got a huge customer. Different ball game after that. So now he actually says, I'm going to tell you the numbers without that huge customer, because that's an outlier. That huge customer is an outlier. That one customer is more than all the revenue put aside, which is around $40-50 million. But that one customer is bigger than that. So I won't talk about that. I will talk about this, and we'll keep on pushing towards to actually thinking, how are we going to become a $1 billion revenue company? So that's also important.
In addition to in addition to what we
Yeah.
heard from Bilal about, his way towards $1 billion company, it's also the mentality, this hunger for, innovation. I'm not saying hunger
100%.
for money or hunger for
Yes.
getting more and more of the market share, because I also know from examples like we've talked about that it's possible actually to create markets also. So you don't really have to crowd one market. The real innovators are people who actually generate completely new market spaces for themselves.
Yes.
So I think the formula here is don't let up on the thinking, the innovation, the constant hunger for more innovation. I think we're coming along nicely with our little bite-sized nuggets of wisdom here. And this is also probably we're coming to the close of this conversation. I wish it were longer, but we do want to leave some time at the end of the session for some questions. We are having some questions come up, so I don't want to rush you guys, but the thing is, this whole culture, this whole idea where people want to innovate on a continuous basis, is there a magic formula? What kind of a culture promotes rapid innovation? What are the nuts and bolts of an enabling startup culture? Do we have any wisdom on that? Or do you succeed despite whatever is there? Or can you actually, we've heard about, but can you actually create conditions which make people think innovatively and build more and more startup successes?
It's quite subjective. It's somebody might come up with a successful company. Why? Because he had a really pathetic life before that, and he wanted to change it. Maybe money was the motivational factor, or maybe he was driven by something else. It's really hard to say how you can create a culture of innovation. But something that I believe is really gonna help out is if we can create a culture of innovation among our educational institutions. For example, there's something I have been talking about for a long time, that people don't talk about research a lot, especially in our region. In universities, students are, now I see a lot of students coming up with their startups as a final year project. They do a final year project and then come up with it as a startup idea, go on to an incubation center or accelerator program for funding and stuff. I believe a lot of students within the university should be focusing a lot on one thing, and that is research and development. How can they change the way things are right now? I mean, one simple example, every student in your university knows how Wi-Fi works, right? Your phones connect. Now, somebody should get an idea that, hey, I'm going to go and make the fastest Wi-Fi ever, right? I'm going to go to the lab and try to do something about the frequencies and maybe come up with the fastest, maybe something that's better than the 5G. Things like that. That's the kind of culture we need to promote within the schools, within the colleges, within the universities, where kids actually start thinking about doing some research and coming up with inventions, not just startups, inventions. Like, people need to invent more. That's what I believe.
We're almost up on our time, but this is wonderful to see that you can actually encourage, motivate, empower people to be innovative. One thing that at least I've seen in a number of places, and of course Ali knows many more examples, where actually it's less about making things easy for people or creating environments. It's about removing the obstacles oftentimes. We find that there's very little you can actually do to get somebody to think innovatively. But removing obstacles to the guys that are actually trying to think innovatively sometimes actually is a bigger formula for success. So what do you think about that? And I'm going to just, after this, let both of you get one last statement or thought or reflection in. And then we on this. So how do you remove obstacles? And then basically I'd also like to, as we close, ask Bilal, of your own personal experience as a Forbes under 30, you know, well, entrepreneur. And with that, I'll just try to close this and go into the question answer session. So yeah, go for it.
So one last bit on that is, as you said, removing the roadblocks. I believe that's the way about it, because most people just give up because they think I don't have enough resources to pull it on my own. Yeah. So if somebody can, you can't really encourage people to do something, but yes, removing the roadblocks, making things a little bit easier for them sometimes really helps out.
So what kind of roadblocks, in your case, for instance, as a Forbes 30, you're a famous guy, you've met a gazillion important people. What could be a problem? What could be a roadblock for somebody like yourself? So what are those roadblocks and how do you think those can be removed?
I believe the biggest roadblock, Faz, is always the mental roadblock, right? A lot of times we just don't talk to somebody. This is the biggest problem that I have seen. If I want something from you, I would think about 10 different things in my mind that Faz is going to say no to me, right? Instead, I should just pick up the phone and call you and ask you myself that, hey, would you like to help me out in this? Chances are you might help me out. But the mental roadblock here is telling me that he's not going to help you out because you don't mean something to him, right? So this is the first step. So first thing is people need to remove that roadblock right from their brain first, and then talk about other people putting roadblocks in front of them. In my case, I have been fortunate that I made this little success within this short period of time. I know a lot of very, very intelligent people who could not. And this is something that I have never understood how, but maybe it has something to do with luck as well. Or maybe it has something more to do with the persistence that some people just don't want to give up. Whatever the roadblocks, whatever the problems, they just want to keep going. I think that's the key to success in my case, that I usually just don't give up.
Great. Of course, that's also we've learned from other stories as well. Ali,
Yeah, it's really interesting, this thing, and it's all about mindset and removing obstacle, engaging with people within organization. Now I'm actually putting my change management hat, engaging with people, allowing them to actually talk, allowing them to come up with ideas, not refuting creativity, and trying to reason in a very polite and nice way. Like I have a real example. One example is I started with a lean training, and I started with 80 slides, and the CEO on every slide said, Toosy, this is not a slide. You don't need to have this as a slide. From 80, we reduced it to 25. Exactly, and we came up with the exact communication which we wanted people to hear, instead of actually teaching them things which were not relevant. So what was important was not only to actually guide a person through, but also allow the person to give creative ideas, and harness creativity, let people think. A very important thing is learn how to learn, and let people innovate and celebrate innovation, celebrate ideas. And some of the most, I actually know a product which is bringing $1 billion every year, which started with a joke. And that joke was that there was a problem with anesthetists. They have to hold they used to have to hold a person's the device when during operating. I'm talking about a few, maybe more than a decade or so. Then a product, and it was just a joke. And a joke that a student actually said to his professor, okay, how would it be if we don't have to hold it? Or this guy actually holds, it looks weird. Why not actually have something in which it started from actually a ridicule or something like that, and it ended up into an idea, ended up going through all the human trials, everything, and now it's bringing in $1 billion per annum, that same product, which started from a joke. So that joke could have actually been killed. That product could have been killed. That idea could have been killed there and there then. And that idea actually also came from a small area. That didn't come from Lahore. It didn't come from a big city. It actually came from a very rural area.
I'm reminded of Bilal's comment about persistence and not taking no for an answer, and not just taking this sort of letting people run you down and so on. In fact, the other interesting aspect of this is that from a very young age, we are taught to fear failure. Yeah. And that's how we are conditioned. And and in Asian cultures, this is even more pronounced in that this concept of face and this idea that what will people say if I am not sort of the first time I don't succeed, or if I'm not the best. And that perhaps to a large extent might be responsible for people giving up quickly, because they say, oh, I can't do this right. So, and then if you can overcome that fear of failure, I think all these things that you talk about and all the attitudes that you say are positive and enabling would probably find room in your personality. So I think that was a lovely, well, it's a kind of an advice as well from two actual entrepreneurs who've made success, that if somebody tries to throw you there's a curveball or throw up an obstacle in your way, there's always a way around it, or at least most of the time. If you don't try, you'll never find it. Yeah. And the only way to find out whether there is an obstacle or it's a blank, completely dead end is to try and find an opening, and then you can figure out if it's actually a dead end. So lovely. So I think the whole idea that we started talking about is about startups, about there being essentially new ideas for products or services that can be scaled up. Essentially, they're being placed in a market that has room for it. So it's appropriate for, that $1 billion market that you talked about. Then it's essentially about user and emotional satisfaction of the user. The utility of that is triggered by the emotional satisfaction, basically a product gives. And then you also said about the roadmap that, in your way to $1 billion company basically is build, measure, and learn quickly. And Bilal gave us the idea of those 100 people power groups that you've talked about. So if you're able to keep talking to those power groups of people, you're able to learn quickly and rebuild until you've got the right thing. So with that, I suppose we've covered perhaps, at least not completely, but at least covered enough of the topics that the Six Sigma course on startups is going to address for us. Right, Ali? Because for the course that we are running, the Six Sigma Black Belt in the academy at AIT and Toosy Advisory Services, the entire course is actually going to take people through this mind shift, through identifying tools and techniques, and then also showing them a lot of live experience, like from people like Bilal and so many others that we all know, who will actually then provide the impetus, the enthusiasm, and the skill set to get people to think as entrepreneurs, and also know that they might not succeed the first time, or the second time, or the 20th time, but they will succeed. And when that success comes, it will wash away all that's gone before it. So thank you, gentlemen. We're slightly over time, but we started a bit late as well. It's 6:07 now. And we'd like to open this up to questions. I've got one question here, which talks about, when is the next seminar? I was late. I wanted to join early. When are you having the next seminar? That's a good question to ask. And when is the course So Ali, what's the next plan for?
Well, if you go to the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt course, the Lean Startup is a module within that. One thing which I have done is that, because I believe that the Lean Six Sigma knowledge has evolved over time. So one thing which we are doing differently in AIT, in the Lean Six Sigma Academy, which we've made, is that we've included, amongst other things which are not in the traditional Lean Six Sigma curriculum, we've included Lean Startup as a core thing, because that is also something where ideas come from. And I think as a practitioner, leaving that out is leaving a part of the core knowledge area. I mean, we can't just stay with the 80s, the concepts from the 80s and the 90s. Similarly, the lean leadership, we have lean leadership, we have the concept of real lean, we have the concept of lean mindset and innovation. So these things are part and parcel of the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt and Lean Six Sigma Black Belt courses we're offering. We are going to eventually come up with a separate short course on Lean Startup, and I might actually, we might even engage Bilal with it, if he's ready to do that. I would like to actually ask him to actually engage.
We have two questions.
Yeah.
One comes from Bangkok and one comes from Nepal. The first is from Moaz. He says that he's worried about, how to build teams for a startup. So imagine we have a startup with an innovative idea-solving problem. And what things should one keep in mind while building a team to realize that idea to solve a problem? And would they want to just work on a 9 to 5 salary, or sometimes that is also not possible, or will you just use their passion to build teams? And how do you build that emotional bonding that overcomes this need for more money or the desire for more financial success in the beginning? So how does a team, or how does this team building exercise actually move in your experience?
Yeah, so building team
is a long question, so thanks, Maz, for that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of the most important factors of building a startup. So early team is usually two to 3 people. In extreme cases, it goes to about 5 people, but 2 to 3 people. And those 2-3 people, they are not really employees. They are the partners. They are the co-founders. And for them, the most important thing is that they all need to care about that certain idea the same way. It cannot be like one cares about it a lot, this guy is giving in a lot, but the rest of them, they're like, okay, let's see if this will succeed. This is a good thing. Otherwise, we have 3 other options to go by. Now that's a problem right there. You need people who can put in equal amount of, it's really hard for everybody to put in equal amount of energy or equal amount of focus into something, but something that shows that each one is contributing somehow in a way that it kind of equalifies, it kind of makes everybody share equal. And the second thing would be, instead of getting people on salaries right on the very beginning, it's important to give out some equity. The best way is if you are 3 people and you all know that you need each other's skills to build it up, it's the best way would be to split it equally among all 3 people. That's really important. If you're 2 people, split it even, like 50% each, because the most important thing here that most people don't understand is it is much better to own 10% of $1 billion company than own 100% of nothing. So that's what you need to understand when building the team. It's all about sharing, because other people need to feel that
one of
they
the
own
things
it.
that struck me when you were answering this question is, people are often looking for, a how-to guide, or something that simplifies their uncertainty and so on. So Ali, do you think that if say one team got around an idea would say getting familiar with the Lean Six Sigma concept, for instance, help the team visualize things together, build design concepts together, and overcome some of the team building, norming obstacles. That's one question. How does getting, say, a training or a webinar or seminar or a certificate on Lean Six Sigma help, or does it at all? The second part of the question, not everybody has the luxury of working without money. And so this is a question that basically is also echoed by our second questioner, Melissa, who talks about sustainability of these models, because we assume that people will have passion and they'll go and they'll work around it. But then when you're going to create a team to create a business with a high risk of failure, how do you get those guys to still work without the promise of sustainability?
Okay, first, your first question, you actually had two questions. And first question is, in the traditional Lean Six Sigma curriculum, no, this is not covered. But in our, we have the Lean Startup concept, and it's a whole module. So yes, if you go through our training, it is part of it. And so you'll go through all the build, measure, learn, you'll go through all those things, you'll have that simulation, you'll have that discussions and all these things, part and parcel of that curriculum. And that would also come in the exam too, because there's an exam about that, because I personally believe that if you leave that portion out, you're missing a big thing. Now, coming up to the question about not being able to work without a salary, or now when you have small iterations, fast iterations, small iterations, fast iterations, in a short period of time, that salary or that income might not matter. Rather, the emotional bonding with your problem would matter even more. And I can give you a very recent example without naming names. In Pakistan, we had a problem of ventilators. You might have heard that. We found out one fine day, because we don't need ventilators that many. You don't need too many ventilators in normal circumstances. In COVID-19, yes, you need more ventilators. So all of a sudden, we realized that we only have 2,000 odd ventilators. Now, a person from the startup community who has been also training people and also speaking and discussing with multiple people came up. He got one doctor who had experienced SARS-1. He was in China when the SARS-1 happened. He got a few engineers, some designers. They went into a room for 1 week, 10 days, and came out with a prototype. Now, not working, not getting paid for that short period of 10 days, and eventually coming out of a prototype, with a prototype. That, because of the emotional bonding, they could have done it. So maybe 10 days is a bit too short. I mean, they made the whole process very lean because there was a sense of urgency. So in such circumstances, when you're solving a problem where you have an emotional attachment, and at the same time, you can get fast results. After those 10 days, what happened? They went to Pakistan Engineering Council, they went to Ministry of Health. And now, I mean, recently you've heard the Minister of Science and Technology announcing that we're going to get these, we're in one of those countries which are manufacturing. So it's all about emotional connectivity. It's all about the passion. Sometimes you do not have the money to pay initially. And that's why you become co-founders in startups. And coming back to the same thing, which definition which I initially said, that what is a startup? And if we consider that a startup, like a division or a cross-functional team within, let's say, General Electric, or a cross-functional team in a bank, if we consider that as a startup, they are working in the startup way. They are not, but they're not actually doing a business like that, as they're not becoming co-founders, but because they're using the lean startup concepts, and because of they're using the startup way and operating in that uncertainty, scalable thing, they can create something, but obviously they would be, in that case, they would be getting salaries. So that's also one.
Fortunately, there's good news for some of these bright people, that there's a thriving venture capital market out there,
Yes.
which seeks such good ideas. Now, we've all seen a number of competitions, a number of various hackathons, so many things that the culture for innovation is also evolving as we go.
Yes.
So there was a time when if you wanted to go into business and you thought it was a great idea and the banks were not lending you money, you wouldn't have perhaps very many places to go other than family and friends, right? But now, fortunately for us, in this evolving ecosystem for innovation, we do have some or more handles on which to pull if we need money. So for the questioner, for Melissa to take heart, that there is, if you look around you, if you go online, you'll probably find a number of willing venture capital outfits which are actually looking for bright startups to initiate or fund. And the models are also evolving. Sometimes it's money, other times it's assistance, other times it's market access, other times it's collaborative research. So I think the idea of sustainability itself for a startup is an existential question. And so I think the ecosystem is evolving. So I think this is probably our last question. There's one more, but do you guys have any thoughts for our new startup, aspiring new startup entrepreneurs on where they might locate or identify or seek venture capital, technical support, market access or facilitation? Any thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, Bilal has actually left on technical because of some technical problems. I hope he can get back.
Go ahead.
And
this is the last question.
This venture capital, Bilal's here. I think this Bilal would actually be better in actually answering that because he has already gone through funding. He's already been evaluated. So I would like Bilal to actually answer that question because he would actually give a more practical.
Finally, I'm back.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you get the question, Bilal, or do you want me to repeat it?
I got the question, but I was just disconnecting all the way. But I heard the question. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's about how do entrepreneurs go about raising money early on, right?
Right. The question was basically because a lot of people find that they don't know where to go looking for possible support, and it's not only capital of money. It could also be technical assistance. It could be R&D support. It could be collaborative research. It could be market access mechanisms. Sometimes it's also how to structure a company or how to structure the finances and so on. So there's a lot of very common questions that come our way, which says, where do we go? We have a great idea and we don't have a lot of money. Where do we go? So that is where this question was coming from.
It always depends on what's the current status of the company. For example, you are three guys or three fellows who came up with a great idea, and now you're working on it, but you need some resources. Now that's the stage where a lot of investors may not be interested in putting their money into you. The best part for you at that moment is you can go seek out some incubation programs. A lot of universities have their own incubators now, and then there are government incubators, there are private incubators. So start with an incubation center because they can be a vital tool in giving you access to the resources you need, like some amount of money to pay your interns and stuff, and a happy place for you to work from, things like that. So some programs are for like 3 months, some are for 6 months, And now those 3 to 6 months, they're really crucial. You don't have much resources, but that incubator can really help you out. The next step would be out of incubator. Once you're out, one is you're doing really well and there is somebody who wants to invest in you. That's good. The second would be you go seek an accelerator program. Now, accelerators are those when you're at that stage of the company where you already have some users, right? So that's when you can go to an acceleration program. They will give you access to the market. They will give you access to the investors. They can even help you with marketing and stuff. So those are the steps. And after accelerator, you go talk to investors.
Right, and I've also often heard about when we go to people with an idea, or when people go to possible investors with an idea, they're always looking for a proof of concept. And they want to see whether
Yes.
whatever they're going to come up with actually works. So any thoughts on how you can build coalitions, raise resources, other than the ones that you talked about? These are mostly for like government incubators and university incubators, are for a select, I would even venture to say privileged class, because these are people who are either studying at university or have access to government incubators. What about everybody else? Where do they go? How do they create a proof of concept? How do they build that little nudge into the venture capital marketplace?
That's Dr. Faiz, that's exactly why we talk about, that's exactly where the concept of minimum viable product, which we talked, the build, measure, learn cycle. When you've gone through build, measure, learn cycle a few times and you've made a minimum viable product and you've built upon it, you could actually show that this is a proof of concept of my idea, if your proof of concept is successful. And at the same time, there's another thing which is very important for the university and for the ecosystem to understand, that there are certain complexities which you would find if you're making something very innovative, I mean, very engineering oriented. But interestingly, if you look within a university, you would find multiple people with multiple skill sets within the academic domain. And if you could engage on a very small part, on that very small part, that particular person, like, let's say if someone actually, a wild thought, someone actually says, I want to make a battery, which is going to be put in a car, which should be better than Tesla. That person needs to find a person who has that type of education or that type of knowledge, who can, the missing link onto different aspects of making that and getting them in the team, maybe collaborating, maybe they'll have to actually pay something, or maybe they'll have to actually give some equity or something like that. Or let's say someone says, I want to make an SUV which is way better than Tesla. Or let's say I would say that I want to make something which is going to scale, and it's going to, the battery or something like that, which is going to keep on, which is not going to actually die down so fast. Everyone has a mobile, and within a day, and in certain things, within what you call it, half a day sometimes, if depending on the usage, your battery goes down, it drains down. So if someone wants to make something like that, you have to connect with people, you have to connect with different universities, you need to know people in the universities and find out which particular skill set who has. And believe me, one of the ways which we talk about in Lean Six Sigma is underutilization of resources. We have so much resources, we have so much intellect, so much knowledge out there, but just because we are not utilizing that knowledge and we are just using it in a different way, we are stopping innovation. We are stopping new products coming in. The universities need to reach out, and the people need to reach out to the universities.
The message is there are already institutional support mechanisms available, and we need to look for them. But then there are always perhaps alternatives as well. So one of the things that an entrepreneur does within that innovative thinking kind of paradigm is that they also look for resources, how to make the most of whatever little they have. But that's also something that is pretty much very common to observe and very common sense, but not that easy to do. In our case, I think what we're trying to achieve here is to engage more and more people in this kind of a conversation. It's now 6:30. We had to my understanding, a 90-minute session, 1 hour for you gentlemen's conversation and 30 minutes for whoever wanted to ask questions. We filled the time rather well. We had some excellent questions. And although personally, I'd like to carry on and, probe some more on some of the challenges we have. And the bad thing about being a moderator is you can't ask any questions yourself. So maybe next time I'll jump into the audience and give you some questions. But thank you for being part of this discussion, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for logging in. We have quite a reasonable number of people joining on Facebook Live as well as on our web link on Zoom. So thank you for making time, and I hope you got some insights into lean startups. But the most important message here is that we're here for you. AIT Extension and Toosy Advisory Services, Lean Six Sigma Academy is here to create more experience for you, create more opportunities to interact with people. Today we brought you Bilal. Tomorrow we will make, by tomorrow I mean the next time, we will bring you other examples, other stories, and hopefully we will kickstart in your mind the next big idea, which will be the billion-dollar business that Bilal talked about. And the critical element in this is thinking like an entrepreneur. And if you want to do that, I'd encourage you to keep joining the webinar series that we have on Lean Six Sigma with Mohammed Toosy and myself. And until next time, I'd like to say goodbye to you and also thank our speakers and of course, Mr. Mohammed Toosy, CEO of Toosy Advisory Services, and Mr. Bilal Athar, CEO of Wi-Fi Gen. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. And thank you, everyone else, for tuning in. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.